Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar for Advocacy for the Ignatian Family Teach-In for Justice. For those of you who I don't know, my name is Jorge Palacios. I am the Migration Coordinator for Youth Engagement for the Ignatian Solidarity Network. I'm excited that folks are here today, and I'm excited to introduce our presenter, James Luisi, who's going to help us think through the ways in which delegations can prepare for Advocacy Day for IFTJ. And, some of these things are, apply to advocacy outside of the Ignatian Family Teach-In for Justice, definitely to any sort of planning of delegation meetings, advocacy meetings with Congress people at the state level, at the national level, for other, advocacy days, but we're going to specifically address Advocacy Day at IFTJ this year. If you have any questions at any point, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll also have, a couple minutes at the end of our presentation to sort of talk through some of these questions. So without further ado, James, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jorge. I'm happy to be here with you all. My first foray into advocacy really was when, after I graduated from Loyola University Chicago, I had the opportunity to work with Network Lobby for Catholic Social Justice. And I remember when I first started out being very intimidated by the process of going on an Advocacy Day visit or participating in a lobby visit. Because I didn't really know what went into it. And so I've had the opportunity over the past few years to help several different schools schedule their Advocacy Day visits for the Ignatian Family Teach-In for Justice. And it's become one of my favorite parts of the entire event. And so I'm excited to be here today to give my take on what I think goes well for preparing a group for Advocacy Day, and to answer any questions or to brainstorm as a group how we might solve some of these common issues that we come up against. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can everyone see my little presentation? Does it look all right? Maybe. Awesome. So here's how I'd like to proceed. One, I'd like to think about, I think how we think about advocacy matters a lot. So I want to kind of reframe it around thinking about relationship. Want to talk a little bit about how we go about scheduling the visits in case that's something that you might have done yet. Now would be a great time to start doing that if you haven't done it yet. I know I still have some phone calls and emails that I need to make. Then I want to talk a little bit about what you can do to prepare your team before you go to Washington, D.C., what you can do to continue preparing your team while you're in D.C., give an overview of what a visit might look like in case you've never experienced that, or in case, maybe we can swap stories about some visits that went really well and maybe didn't go so well and what we can do to address those things. And then I want to talk about follow-up for the visit and then leave some time for question and answer. So the reason that I think framing advocacy as a relationship is because it really touches on a few different things. One, these offices that we're going to go visit, hopefully this isn't the last time that we're going to go visit or talk to or speak with our elected representatives. And it's also, I think, helpful to think of them as offices too, because sometimes they do switch out personnel over time. And so I think if we position ourselves and our students to think about we're beginning a relationship with a government office, that maybe takes away a little bit of the, some of the intimidation factor of going to sit down with a particular legislator or with opinions that we might have about him or her. The relationship analogy continues to thinking about the issues that, advocacy, especially on Capitol Hill, is just one tool in our tool belt to help raise awareness of these issues or to be in engagement with these issues. In some people, this is going to be their preferred method of engaging with and being a champion for these issues. And for others, they're going to have other avenues. Not everyone is called to advocacy, and that's okay. But what's important is that we begin a relationship with the issues because these issues have always been here and they're not going away anytime soon. And so if we think about it as an ongoing relationship, then this advocacy visit is not make or break and there's less pressure on the visit. If we think about it also as an ongoing relationship with ISN and with other IFTJ participating ministries, then we're setting ourselves up and our students up, our congregations up to continue learning from each other, to continue working together. Because one thing that I've had the benefit of seeing, especially being on advocacy visits with other parishes and schools, is that we all bring something different to the table, and that when we are listening to each other and paying attention to what each other's sharing, that's when we become the best advocates, I think. And lastly, I think that if we begin this conversation with our students, especially, I know many of the students I'm taking, this is their first time that they'll ever participate in a congressional advocacy visit. My hope for them is that they will see that this is something that they continue to do, that they want to continue to do, and that they can continue to do, perhaps long after they leave my school, after they leave college. You know, I think that's key to this exercise. So I think it benefits us all if we don't look at the advocacy day as one or two make or break visits, where we either get full support or need, you know, walk away with a feeling like we didn't move the dial. Instead, if we think about it as an ongoing relationship in each of these areas, then there's something that we'll be able to walk away saying, hey, we made progress. So if you haven't already begun scheduling your visits, I think it's always a great idea to try and schedule with a member of Congress. But we have to remember that they're busy people, and right now there's a lot going on in Congress. So it might be unlikely that we have an opportunity to meet with a senator or a representative. Nevertheless, it's always worth it to ask if we can meet with them. Sometimes they're very excited to meet with student groups, and they'll even rearrange their schedule, especially if they know, oh, it's this particular student group. Yeah, I'd love to meet with them. But it really is not the end of the world if we're meeting with a staff person. In fact, some of the best meetings that I've had have been with legislative assistants or aides, and more often than not, they're just as plugged in, perhaps even more plugged in than their bosses are to the issues, and can result in a great, really productive meeting. In fact, many times the legislative assistant, you know, is somebody from the community that we are representing on the delegation, and so they even are able to say, "Oh, you go to school here? Well, I had a brother, or I had a sister, or I have a cousin, or I went to school there." And so, again, thinking about that relationship, you now have a connection in the office who gets what your institution is all about. The best and most effective way that I've found to really get the scheduling a visit is just to be very persistent in emailing, making phone calls, and quite honestly, I've been bumped around to several different people in some offices before. But usually I get to the right person who will be the right person for the meeting, and we have a fantastic meeting. So do not be discouraged if, like, hey, I filled out the form online to request a meeting, or I called the office and I spoke to the intern who answered and I haven't heard back. Persistence really is the name of the game. You know, again, there's a lot going on in Congress all the time, especially now. And so, you know, sometimes things get lost in the shuffle, but persistence pays off, and you will more than likely succeed in getting a meeting if you just stay persistent. Some other things to keep in mind, though: it's important to focus the meeting on one issue area, such as environmental policy or migration. Now, we can talk about clever ways to get around. I know it's important that we talk about both of these issues, and neither issue is more important than the other. It's a mistake to pit them against each other. But often when you're meeting with a legislative aide or staff person, they tend to be an expert in one issue or the other. It's very rare that they have knowledge about both. Now, that doesn't mean that once the meeting is winding down and you realize, ooh, we have 10 minutes left in the meeting, would you mind if we spend some time talking about this other issue that we didn't have a chance to talk about yet? That's perfectly fine. Just recognize that the staff person that you might be meeting with might not have a lot of knowledge in that area. Sometimes, if an office is really kind, they might make time for both issue areas and send staff people who represent both issues. But in my experience, it's best to know that I'm probably only going to be able to do one of these two things well, and I'd rather do one of them well and set my students up for success rather than have a meeting that might be meandering or unfocused or result in us talking past each other because there's not common knowledge about the issue. It's also important to be able to identify who's a constituent. Sometimes this really helps in getting a meeting if you're able to say, hey, we have a group and 10 of the 15 of us are constituents. Sometimes, especially if you're going through a form on the representative's website, that can be very important. And that makes sense, right? Because this representative is intended to represent their constituents. Now, that doesn't mean that other groups don't do this all the time, where they have meetings, but you're more likely to have an easier time getting a meeting or even having a better meeting if you're able to identify, hey, these people who are a part of our meeting, they live in and vote in your district. The meeting should probably be only about 30 minutes. And I highly recommend, if you have a second meeting, that you leave at least 30 minutes between when the meeting is going to end and the next meeting is going to begin. Some of these buildings look like they're very close to each other, but sometimes you can end up walking quite a bit, and you have to go through a secure area, or sometimes even go to a conference room that you might not be familiar with, or even the staff person might not be familiar with. So leaving ample time between meetings helps avoid some confusion and leaves time, especially if you're meeting up with another group for another visit, for everyone to get to the same place together. So preparing your team before you get to DC. It's very important that you don't walk in totally cold on what your legislator has been doing. So it's good to, I like to give my students some time to look at, hey, if we're going to this representative's office, let's look at their voting history. And I think it's especially important to find at least one piece of legislation, a press release, a speech, some area of common ground that you have with the representative, that you can say, hey, we noticed that the representative cares about this. We noticed that the senator cares about that. We care about that too. I think it can be especially important in these times of political division to use the lens of Catholic social teaching, because quite honestly, Catholic social teaching transcends much of our political divide. So if we're looking through the lens of Catholic social teaching, we'll almost always find some shared area of common ground to say, hey, thank you so much for caring about X, Y, or Z. We care about that too. Even if it's not the particular issues that we've come to talk about, it starts our meeting off in a space of feeling like, hey, we can make progress together here. I've always found it very important to use the backgrounder resources that ISM provides. They're pretty thorough and provide a lot of context for both the issues that we're being asked to advocate on. Our students often have personal stories that they can relate to. And, it's rare that our students arrive not without an interest in at least one of these issues. But the backgrounder can help them begin to think about, this is some of the context that I'm walking into. And here's some of the specific things that we can begin asking for. They're really useful documents to help speed up the research on the issues so that your team can arrive feeling like they know what they're talking about. It's good if personal stories can be identified. For example, if you've had students who have participated in an immersion program, or perhaps know the impact of they personally experienced and are comfortable talking about how U.S. migration policies have affected themselves, if they feel comfortable sharing those stories, they begin working with them to figure out how they might share those stories in the context of a meeting. It's good if there are folks who can tee up the issue area before the personal story begins being shared. But oftentimes, the personal story, once shared, that really becomes the focus of the meeting. Same thing with ecological issues. If there are students who are involved, for example, in a green team, or they've done a research project, or perhaps they do have family members who have been personally impacted by a lack of U.S. response to environmental issues, then those stories, the goal would be to help shape those stories in a way where they feel confident and comfortable in sharing them. That gets to the point of asking the representative to take action. Lastly, I think before getting to DC, it's at least good to plant the seed in everyone's mind that you're going to be an active participant in these meetings, even if you're not having the most active role. Everybody should be taking notes, even if it's just on their phone or on a piece of paper that they brought in with them, because these meetings, everybody is nervous. Even the person you're talking to is nervous to some degree. Everyone is nervous. And so to have multiple folks tracking what is said in the meeting, that's always great. That way, when you debrief the meeting, it feels like everybody has something concrete to contribute. So I think that those are the good seeds to begin planting before you get to DC. One key thing that might affect some is you might be joining a large group, especially if you're in Ohio or New York or Washington. You might be joining a large group for a shared meeting, or you might already know, hey, we're going to go to these representatives' offices, and we're privately, as these few schools, we're gonna organize these meetings together. If you're joining other delegations for a larger meeting, you want to communicate in advance as much as possible what roles you're imagining for each of your speakers. That way, when you arrive in DC and you begin to plan things out, you'll already have an idea of how you're going to equally divide roles among your delegation, so that there's less last minute planning, and you can begin getting the group practicing. One advantage of just doing your own visits, if you're not participating in these larger visits, is that you can begin doing some of that planning and practicing before coming to DC. But that's just often it's not possible for these larger visits. One thing that I found to be important is, especially in these larger gatherings, is sometimes you have college students, high school students, and parish parishioners, and they're all passionate about the issues, but there are differences in maturity, familiarity with the issues, confidence in public speaking. And so it's, I think, especially important in those situations to have at least one adult among your delegation who you agree this person is going to manage the preparation for the meeting. That way, sometimes we need to help college students recognize, hey, these high school students, they're a little bit more nervous than you, and this is their first time doing this. Or sometimes you have to, walk back a really precocious high school student and say, hey, these college students have something valuable that they need to share, or these parishioners, they have something that they need to share too. So we need to figure out a way that we can all contribute together. That's when I think having one person in your shared group who can help coach the meeting along can sort of serve as a conductor for this orchestra and say, yeah, we need to be hitting a couple more of these notes a little bit more, and dialing it back in this area a little bit, just so that the good of the meeting can happen. And I think that that's what's key, is to keep in mind that a good meeting that makes people want to continue in advocacy is better than a meeting that really knocks it out of the park on hitting all of the issues. So while you're at the Teach-In, I highly encourage you, if you haven't already signed up, to sign up for an Advocacy 101 pre-session. Even if you've done an excellent job of preparing your group, sometimes getting them together with a professional advocate who does this for a living in Washington, D.C., just helps begin to ease the nerves that much more. You can talk about what it's like to go to the advocacy visit and ask them questions about, hey, have you ever encountered this? So they can begin putting your mind more at ease. I think it's also important, the teach-in is kind of an evidence gathering, preparatory session for these advocacy visits. So it's good to keep checking in with your group periodically to ask, hey, even in our breakout sessions that, we might not have intentionally gone to these to look for things that we can bring to our meeting. Are you discovering anything? Remember, we're meeting with Representative A and Senator B on Monday. Is there anything that we've learned right here, right now, that we can say, hey, we've been engaging in this conference all weekend, and these are things that we've learned, and we're excited to share them with you. I think by checking in periodically with them, you remind them that, hey, we have this like kind of crowning experience at the end that we're all preparing for, and we all have something that we can bring to that experience. Lastly, I think it's very important, especially if you're meeting up with other groups, to attend the Sunday evening advocacy help sessions. Just to give one final, if you're meeting with other groups, it's a great time to practice and clarify what the roles are going to be at the meeting, and give everybody a chance to practice the meeting. You might even consider sitting in and pretending to be the legislative aide that you'll be meeting with, so that they can say, they have an experience of like, what if the person is, distracted during our meeting? What if they're bored during a meeting? What if they're a little bit hostile? What if they overtake the meeting and they begin going into minutia about this issue that I don't understand? You can practice it all out and help them understand that, hey, no matter which direction this meeting goes, there's a way that we can always bring it back and have a good meeting. So I highly encourage you to use that time. There will also be professional advocates, again, walking around who can answer questions in particular about the issue areas, or just about, hey, we were thinking about saying this in our meeting. What do you think about that? Or we're thinking about sharing this story. Is there anything that you think, we should introduce it, or we can target it toward a particular ask in the meeting? That time is designed to help your group feel confident going into Monday morning's meetings. So I encourage you to attend it. So now we're thinking about Monday at the visits. If there were 4 things that I think every group should do, it would be arrive early, avoid bags, stay flexible, and relax. You want to arrive early because you want to make sure that everybody is there, and that'll help you set you up for success. You don't want to be rushed. You want to be able to take your time with, saying hello to people in the office and feeling comfortable where you are. You don't want to feel rushed. So plan to arrive for each visit at least 15 minutes before the meeting start time. That'll give you a chance to go in and check at the front desk, or arrive to the meeting location, or maybe even send a last minute email. Sometimes I've had staffers who were running late and they weren't there, and I had to send an email and say, hi, we're here. I was hoping to meet with you. Has anything changed? And something had changed. And then a different staff person came out to meet us. So be prepared to move to a new location, or maybe even to meet with somebody you weren't expecting to meet with. I've had some meetings that I thought were going to happen inside, but due to circumstances, we ended up meeting right outside. If we prepare ourselves to arrive early and to be flexible in those situations, then that's going to ease nerves, knowing that, hey, we're already prepared for even the unexpected. It's important to avoid bags. You just don't want to you don't want to worry about anybody leaving anything behind. But also with security on Capitol Hill, could really hold up your group. So unless it's absolutely necessary to bring in, I think bringing notebooks and pens, wallets and phones, in case you're planning on getting lunch somewhere on the Capitol, those would all be good to bring with you inside, and maybe a leave behind for each issue for each meeting. So if you have 2 meetings back to back, it'd be good to have one leave behind on migration and one leave behind on ecological issues for each meeting. So 4 total leave behinds. And this, again, thinking about like not having enough time to talk about each issue, this is a great way to say, hey, I know we didn't get a chance to talk about ecological issues during our meeting on migration, but if you could pass this along to your boss, that would really mean a lot to us. So those would be all that I would bring in to any of the visits. Again, staying flexible. So much can change the morning of. And so you just want to arrive early and be ready for maybe we're meeting with somebody who doesn't know anything about the issue that we prepared so hard for. That's okay. Still do your best. The anybody in the office is going to take great notes and pass them along to their boss. And even still, we're going to talk in a second about following up. That gives you another chance to say, hey, we did meet. We met with this person. And if they didn't pass along notes, here's what we hope that they would have passed on. So be okay with the fact that you might not be meeting with the person you expected to be meeting with, that your meeting might start later than expected. It might not even be your fault. It might be that the office was going through some sort of issue. The location could change, and you might know the issue better than the staff person that you're talking to. Finally, everyone needs to relax. The goal is not to have a perfect visit. I don't think I've ever been a part of any. I've been a part of many meetings with really talented people who knew so much about the issue they were talking about. The goal is never to have a perfect visit. I don't think perfect visits exist. The goal is to share our faith and to share how it overlaps with these important issues, and to communicate to these offices that we care about these issues and we're going to keep showing up, and we're going to do what we can to be partners to ensure that people are cared for, that the earth is cared for, that we're engaged citizens, and that our voices and the voices of those who are excluded are brought to Capitol Hill. I think the most successful visit that we can have is one that inspires our students to want to continue doing this, because that in the long run is going to make more of a difference than a lobby visit where we hit all the right notes. Finally, after you've come back from DC, or maybe on your way back to DC, it's going to feel hectic. I know for everybody, every time I've gone, it's always a little bit hectic, just making sure that the group gets back and has had a good experience. Find time to debrief the visit with your group and ask them what stood out to you. What did you notice that people said? This is when it's good that everybody took notes, because everybody's going to notice something different. And so by having all of those perspectives, you'll be able to, you're doing two things. One, you're gauging their knowledge of the visit and and the issues in the visit, and whether or not they think they were successful in that communication. And also, how did they feel like the office responded? Do we need to do more? Did the office respond well? Did they earn a thank you from us in terms of like, hey, you seem to be doing really great work? Are there other areas that we could be doing stuff in our own community that go beyond advocacy to, work in partnership with our elected officials? So debriefing with your group, I think, goes a long way into helping shape them as lifelong advocates. ISN will also want to know how your visits went, because they're engaged in advocacy all year long. And so knowing who might need to hear more about certain issues and who might be potential partners, that's really important. So sharing that information with ISN goes a long way in helping our entire community, the advocacy, be successful. It's very important. A simple way, you end a conversation, you might be like, I don't know where we go from here on this conversation. It went really well, or I don't know where we go from here on this conversation. It didn't go like I was hoping. Sending a simple thank you email for the time that you were able to share together goes a long way to continuing the conversation and keeping our students engaged. So it might be important to identify a subset of the group or one person from the group who's responsible for drafting thank you emails to each of the offices. And it can be simple to start it by saying, like, dear Representative so-and-so's office, it was encouraging to learn that, or we hope the information we left behind was helpful, or although we disagree about X, we hope our shared commitment to Y. These are all great ways to continue to just hammer home the message that we've shared with them. And then you want to, if you have the opportunity, I recognize not all of our institutions have this opportunity to continue to work with the groups that we bring, but this is a jumping off point to continue to observe our legislators' votes, press releases, speeches, and to continue that relationship, and to say, hey, we want to give you kudos for saying this, or hey, we were troubled when you said that, especially given the great meeting that we had. This shows the office that, we're folks who are engaged, and that, reminds them that, hey, we're might not be the same people who are coming back next year, but we're going to keep sending delegations every year. And then you might also consider how you might continue to follow up with, other visits in your community, or even letter writing campaigns. And ISN is also a great resource for lots of different events and ways to engage that go beyond the meeting on Capitol Hill. So I hope that this has been a kind of comprehensive uh, coverage of everything that I think you can do and that you're probably already doing to prepare your group for a really successful visit. Hopefully you're feeling confident and encouraged that, at the end of the day, it doesn't need to be a perfect visit. It just needs to be a visit that keeps our students wanting to uh, participate and be civically engaged. So with that, I think we have a little bit of time for some questions and answers. Um, thank you so much. Are there any questions maybe that we could brainstorm as a group, or any wisdom to share?
Hi, everyone. I can jump in real quick. So James, thank you so much. That was super comprehensive. I really appreciate that. A couple of things that I would add just from, I think, from having a few years of practice with this and also working with college age students, there are some things, I think, as James mentioned, like the preparation is so important. Like that is the number one most important thing in my mind. And we've utilized particular tools like govtrack.us. That's been a really big tool for us in doing the background research on your representatives, your senators and representatives. And I think knowing the committees that they're on is really helpful in crafting your meeting message. So GovTrack will give you all this information. I'll tell you like their leadership score, which is kind of an amalgamation of a bunch of things like how long they've been in Congress, what they work on, how much legislation they put out, and also tell you what committees they're on. So you can use those as talking points when you are crafting your message. And you can get really specific, right? Saying like, I know that the senator sits on this committee, so it's really important for us to let them know that X, Y, and Z. I think like also being able to master the compliment sandwich, even with representatives we may not agree with, is really helpful, of saying like, we thank you so much for doing this. We'd also like to see you do this. And even where folks have been really strong leaders on particular issues, I'm thinking of like Senator Dick Durbin, for example, when we met with his office with Loyola Chicago. He's a really prominent leader in migration justice in Congress, and there's always room to push them further. So I think even if folks like thanking them so much for their support and continuing to ask like for further action, maybe creating legislation, co-sponsoring legislation, all of that. And the last thing, I was taking notes, James, during your presentation. The last thing I think is helpful is looking up if they're Jesuit educated. So you can go through, if you just Google ISN has a page, AJCU has a page. There's a lot of Jesuit educated representatives in Congress, and that's an immediate connection that you can make and say like, we see that you attended Marquette. So you're familiar with some of these Jesuit values, and like really connect on those things. So yeah, I think those are some of the tools that we've utilized in preparing our groups. I think for college students, we have student leaders that kind of coordinate a lot of the logistics of the delegations, and we have them reach out to congressional offices to schedule those meetings. So for other colleges and universities, kind of giving your students some leadership development and having them reach out and do these meeting requests can be really helpful, as formative for me as a student. I think that's it. I'm going to stop talking, but thank you so much. This is really helpful context.
Thank you, James. Also, thank you, Emily, for the context of university students and the university delegation. Yeah, I just want to say, I think one of the things, as someone who has helped put together delegations, but also been a member of a delegation One of the things that often feels the most daunting is this, just unfamiliarity with what the process can look like. And so I think being transparent with members of delegations as you're planning, what we expect these meetings to look like, what are the things that can happen on the day of, right? Just understanding that we might need to be flexible about timing, or we might not meet with who we're expecting to meet with. Our meeting might be cut short for any number of reasons. Sort of explaining this as we're planning for these meetings, right? As we're sort of working through what this can look like, understanding that it might take more than one email or more than one phone call to schedule a meeting with a representative, especially for college students. If you're having students schedule their own meetings, I'm dealing with that even now as someone who is multiple years into scheduling meetings with offices of senators and representatives, right? I think just having this level of transparency and understanding that it's not, and I think you made a really good point of this, James. It's not supposed to be perfect, but it is supposed to be inspiring, right? This inception of a relationship, and I especially appreciate the framing in that regard, right? Like this is a relationship, and there's a lot of ways to follow up. In particular, in March of this next year, ISN will be doing we'll be having the Ignatian Advocacy Madness, which will be another opportunity for folks to get involved in advocacy efforts with state and national reps, and senators. So we're this idea of a relationship, and is something that can help inform us as well as help inform the people who are our elected officials, is I think especially helpful in this context. Yeah, I think if anyone has any other questions or any other comments, you're more than welcome to put them in the chat, or to unmute and kind of share what those may or may not look like. I also wanted to give just 2 or 3 minutes to my colleague Brenna. I know that folks who registered for this online were hoping that we might be able to answer some questions about preparing delegations for advocacy. But also, folks had a lot of questions about how to advocate around environmental justice and these climate issues. And so, yeah, I wanted to give Brenna just a few minutes to kind of speak to that.
Yeah. Thanks, Jorge. And I think really what James said is the most important, which is stories matter. And so I think just reminding our students that why you care about these issues is a valid reason to talk about these issues. But for folks who are a little more nuanced in policy, these are the basic asks that we have for our legislators, which is we need to dramatically cut carbon emissions on an aggressive timeline, phase out fossil fuel infrastructure, and accelerated just transition to clean renewable energy, and then prioritize frontline communities, those who are most directly impacted. And so some specific legislation or concepts that we're supporting, because one of these is not legislation necessarily that exists yet, but there has been a call for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, particularly by a block of Pacific Island nations. And so our general ask is that our representatives would consider this process. We've seen this work with like international treaties around landmines, around the ozone layer. We've seen that these have been effective ways to come together as a global community and solve issues. And we just had this great document, Apostolic Exhortation from Pope Francis, come out this week. And in it, he speaks specifically about multinational agreements and our need to drive down global emissions. So just a couple of stories that you might be able to share is there was just a march to end fossil fuels in September of this year in New York City. There is a large Catholic contingent and faith contingent out there, to promote this idea that we need to be moving away from fossil fuels quickly. And you can see this diagram on the left is just from the Fossil Fuels Non-Proliferation Treaty group. And they say, 86% of all carbon emissions in the past decade have been from oil and gas. And it's just not something that we're talking about. And so we just want to get that conversation started. And then our other piece is the Environmental Justice for All Act. This has been a piece of our asks for the last 2 years. And it's just a recognition that every community deserves access to clean water and clean air. And we know that there are specific communities, specifically BIPOC and low-income communities that are more often living in areas with environmental hazards. And so this act is meant to address that. And so just another quote from this new apostolic exhortation from Pope Francis that also puts forth this idea, if you're looking for kind of a faith-based frame. And then we just see a couple of stories, right? Sharon Levine was from Rise St. James, was present at the Teach-In 2 years ago to talk about the plastics facility, the multi-billion-dollar Formosa Plastics that was set to be put in her community. The community organized, and still it is not there, but they live in a place called Cancer Alley, and so there are lots of hazards that their community is facing because it is predominantly a community of color. And then this picture on the right is Jackson, Mississippi. It's a capital city in our country, and last year most of the residents were without access to clean drinking water because of a lack of investment in the community. It is a capital city that is predominantly Black. About 80% of the residents are Black. And so we just see that there are structures and systems that do reinforce kind of certain communities being forced to live with these environmental hazards. And so our main message with this, again, just with some of these stories, is everyone has a right to clean air and clean water, and the Environmental Justice for All Act is going to help address some of those structures and systems that we've had in place that have prevented this equity in the past. So those are the main issues. But again, if just depending on how comfortable your group is speaking about them, sharing a story of concern about why your students care about the environment, maybe their fears, their hopes, their challenges, will be just and maybe more powerful than getting into the minutia of like a fossil fuels non-proliferation treaty. But those are our basic asks, and I'm definitely happy to have follow-up conversations with any of the groups about that if it becomes helpful. So thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Brenna. Yeah, I'll one more time, I'll just kind of open up the opportunity for folks to share out anything that they might have to share, or answer or ask any questions either in the comments, or you can unmute. I'll also share out the backgrounder and talking points that we've put together this year for ecology and migration. And so let me share those. I hope that all of what was presented on today is just sinking in, and everyone is just so enlightened by all of this. I'm really looking forward to Advocacy Day. I'm looking forward to the Teach-In. Looking forward to being in person with all of you wonderful people. So James, thank you once again for leading us through this presentation. Thank you, Brenna. Thank you, Emily, for sharing. Thank you on behalf of ISN for participating in this webinar.